Welcome back to the Speaker's Edge podcast, the podcast specifically designed to help you to learn from some of the world's very best speakers and communicators so that you can master your message and inspire your audience every single time you speak. I'm your host for this podcast, Roddy Galbraith, and I'm thrilled that you're here with us today for the next in the Expert series. 2 episodes back, we were talking to John Maxwell, talking about connecting and communicating and influencing your audience. 1 episode back, we were talking to cellular biologist Dr. Bruce Lipton on the physiology of fear. And today we're talking to Paralympian professional speaker Bonnie St. John with a wealth of information for new speakers particularly. She's a 2-time bronze medal winner at the Paralympics and silver medal winner, and she's spoken at the highest level for decades now, and just a wealth of information. So you're going to love listening to this interview. Take plenty of notes, and we'll circle back to it at the end. Before we get to that though, you might want to download the companion resources. If you do, just go to maxwellleadership.com/the Speaker's Edge. And we would love it if you rate and review the show wherever you enjoy your podcast as well. That would be awesome. All right, so without further ado then, let's dive into this great interview with Bonnie St. John. As I said, she's a Paralympian and she's a great speaker at the highest level for decades now, with just a ton of information about professional speaking. So here's Bonnie. And how have your stories then developed over time, or how has...
Well, everything. One of the things I really wanted to say, having this opportunity to talk to all of you, is that one of the joys for me of speaking is that you never stop learning. You never stop getting better at it. So I've been a full-time speaker for over 20 years now, and I'm still growing and still changing. So when you say, have you learned or evolved, yes. and for me, that's joyous. And if I can help you make a leap forward in that, great. But you'll never stop, and I've taken voice lessons, and I'm a terrible singer. You don't want to hear me sing outside the shower. But I actually took singing lessons because it can help give your voice more resonance as a speaker. And I had my singing teacher give me a warm-up that I could do to warm up my voice. So I didn't actually do that before coming out here, but I often do warm up my voice and do breathing exercises. So there's, you can take acting lessons, you can take singing, there's so many things you can do to improve.
To help, but keeping doing it, obviously, you did make the decision to leave the White House and start speaking.
I did.
Then go back. So did you then go straight to, was it the Washington Speaker Bureau?
No.
I
tried, actually it's funny, I tried to pitch the Washington Speakers Bureau to represent me for years. I sent all my materials in, one of the things I did that was really a great turning point in my career was getting Tony Robbins' agent to represent me for my first book. And I got her to send my stuff to Washington Speakers Bureau. That didn't work either. I didn't get represented by Washington Speakers Bureau until a client told them.
Okay.
So once a client told them that they should be representing me,
and
they listen to clients, right?
Yeah.
That was, more than a decade ago.
Right. And now you're their most booked speaker?
Well, I was in August. I won't say overall forever.
Well, that's still pretty impressive.
In August, I have the distinction of being the most booked speaker at Washington Speakers Bureau. But I love working with them. They're very high integrity. And if you're working with bureaus, there's a lot of bureaus out there, and their bureaus are run by people. So you'll see bureaus and agencies that have a wide variety of levels of integrity. And so that's something you should really look at who's representing you.
Why would you say you've been so successful with them, or why are they now booking you so much? What's the secret to that? Has that been consistent for 10 years? They've been using you a great deal?
Well, let me say, I know not all of you want to be full-time speakers. Some of you want to just do it as part of what you do, and you want to do workshops. You don't necessarily want to be on the big stage. So I know there's a wide variety. So we don't have to talk too much about the business of speaking, but just a little bit. So when I went out on my own, I set up my own office. I hired somebody to be in my office who could deal with customers and be doing that. And I was eventually got represented by many bureaus. And so we're dealing with bureaus, we're dealing with customers, we have contracts, we're doing all of that. When it got to the point where Washington Speakers Bureau was doing 60% of my business, it made sense to flip it, because then they could be my office.
Right.
And so I could make my office just about writing books and doing publicity and doing the other things besides speaking, and rely on their office for that. So the math made sense once it got to a certain point. And some bureaus tried to pressure me into going exclusive with them. Some tried to woo me or pressure me, and you got to look into that really carefully, because if they're trying to do that, there was a gotcha with the ones that were trying to do that.
Right.
Washington Speakers Bureau never pressured me. They said, we're going to do this on a handshake. It's not, if you were exclusive with me and you don't like it 3 months later, you're out. There's no locked in contract, So it's very high integrity, and and I was scared because I had my own office and I was doing all my own marketing. And a lot of speakers have this, is to go to an agency and be exclusive with them, you feel like you're losing control.
Right.
And so when I finally did go exclusive with them, I realized that it was a partnership. That it wasn't that I was turning over everything to them and hoping they would book me enough. It was a partnership. They have a sales team of 20 or 30 people on the phone all the time, but I'm still marketing. I still create the push. I do a special promotion on, when I was quoted on a Starbucks cup, I talked to them and they said, hey, let's give out Starbucks gift cards to a whole bunch of clients and promote the cup, So if I'm not generating interesting things to market, they don't have as much to work with. So if they're not booking me enough, I don't look at it as like they failed.
Right.
We meet regularly and say, are we meeting our goals? If not, what can we do different? Do I need to change my topics? Can I do a special thing with you? We collaborate.
Right.
It's not a loss of control, it's a collaboration. And it took me a while to see it that way.
But presumably, when you go and speak somewhere, that you need to perform there as well. You need to provide. You need to give them the goods.
So absolutely, and this applies to anyone, whether you're going to be doing this full time or not, is in my speaking, I make a real effort to provide value to the client. And there are some people who are in the news and they're really famous and you think, oh, that's great, they get so much speaking because they've got all this publicity, but that only lasts a little while. And I know a lot of speakers who are popular for a year or two, and then they're running around, nobody's booking them. And so because I've provided value to clients year in, year out, I've been able to do this for over 2 decades, and I'm still frequently booked.
Right.
And so it's doing your homework, doing your preparation, really understanding what is this event about? What are the goals of the people running this event? How can I support their goals? How can I use my talents and gifts to support what they're trying to accomplish in this event? And there's a lot of Olympians that don't do that. They just go out and they go, I went to the Olympics, I have this great signature story that I always tell about how I overcame at the Olympics, and that they just talk about them.
Right.
They're not really understanding or serving the customer with their story.
Right. So can we dig into that a little bit then? How do you do that?
I told Roddy earlier too, I had an Olympian come up to me, and I'm a Paralympian who won 2 bronze and a silver at the Paralympics, okay? I had a 4-time gold medal Olympian come up to me and say, I won 4 gold medals, I should get paid more to speak than you do. And I said, good luck with that. And she doesn't get paid more than me to speak.
She doesn't get it.
I'm a self-made celebrity. I'm somebody who was not famous. The Paralympics, when I started 20 years ago, nobody heard of the Paralympics.
Right. Yeah.
But when you're doing hard work and you're serving people, it's funny, the term celebrity, it's about being celebrated. So I go to people's parties and I let them celebrate me. Yeah. But you only get to keep doing that for 20 years if you're really celebrating them. And so, an important part of what I do with many events that I get to go at is to remind people that they are heroes.
Wow.
And when I do pre-interviews and I get to know, I often, not many speakers do this, I will interview 2 or 3 people on the phone before I get there. And then if I can, I'll be in the hotel and I'll randomly sit down at dinner with people wearing the name tags from the conference, I try to get to know people. And it's an interesting process. Like, I'll be talking and talking and talking, and then like at some moment the penny will drop and I will suddenly understand how heroic they are. So there was the payroll association. Like, how boring is that? Like, the people who do payroll for all the companies across the US. But I'm talking to people. I was talking to some people that do payroll at Starbucks, and it was right after they had this big earthquake in Seattle. And they told me stories how they put on those headlamps, those hard hats with headlamps, and they went into the rubble to pull out tapes of the payroll from last week, and they decided to just rerun last week's payroll for everyone across the country, just give everybody the same check they had last week. Because they know people need to pay their rent. And so that was a really heroic story that I shared, about, wow, you guys are really heroic. But you know what? It's not just an earthquake. Sometimes the technology just fails. The printers all fail. How many checks have you ever gotten in your life? I've gotten a lot of payroll checks from different companies I've worked for. You don't even understand sometimes the level that people fought to make sure you got that paycheck no matter what went wrong, because they know you need it. And so I had a number of stories all the way from the earthquake to simple little things where people went to the mat to make sure people got their paychecks. And we don't understand, this is one of the joys for me, is to learn about so many heroes. I just spoke for the people who run the offices of the 911 offices all across the country. There's a conference for people who run the 911 offices. Oh my gosh, I learned so much about what they do. They could be on the phone with the woman who's hiding under the bed because somebody's in her house with a gun. They deliver babies on the phone, They do so many things. And the people on the 911 phones, they don't get credit for that. The EMT who shows up at your house is a hero in a uniform. The policeman is a hero in a uniform. These people sitting answering the phone, sometimes they don't even know how it turned out. But nobody thanks them, and if something goes wrong, they're in deep trouble. But, there's so many everyday heroes.
Right.
And helping people remember how heroic they are, having somebody come from the outside and remind you. The people who do, I'm sorry, there's so many.
This is great stuff.
People who, I spoke for the convention of people who do financial aid at colleges. Those people go into schools to help underfunded kids get into college. And so I'm listening to all the stories of what they do. If a kid doesn't even know who their father is, how do they fill out the form for financial aid? And you don't just get to say, I don't know who my father is, or if your parents in jail or on drugs, it's hard. They go in and they really help kids to get the financial aid they can get into college, beat the odds, And I'm like, you're saving America. You're saving the American dream. If we can't help more kids break out of poverty, that's the American dream. You can be anybody in America.
Wow. So how do you...
But you could, you listen, if you just ask them what they do, they'll tell you all about this paperwork and minutiae. But at some point, the penny drops like, oh, you're saving America,
So what process do you go through, just to go back over that? So you go in early, you sit and join them at the tables, or you just blend, or what do you do?
I try to do interviews ahead of time by phone.
Right.
And so, and one of the keys I learned, again, this is one of those tips that took me 5-10 years to learn that you can have now. When you get a client, and you ask them, you say, you know what, I want to interview a few people before I give the speech so I really understand. I want to listen before I speak. They're going to give you the top 3 people, the senior people. So if it's an association, they're going to give you 3 people on the committee leading the event. If it's a corporation, they're going to give you the head of communications, the head of the division, something else. So I did this for years. I would talk to those 3 people. And when you do that, you come on stage and you sound like management. And it took me years to realize I had to say to the organizer, yes, I'd love to talk to those senior people, but can you give me 1 or 2 people that are typical of the people in the audience? Because especially if you're trying to motivate people, there's a gap, and management is asking them to do X, Y, Z, and the people in the audience aren't doing it. That's why they brought you in. And so if you just come on stage and you sound like management, it's just another talking head. But if you've listened to why it's hard to do what management is asking, or what the association thinks everybody should be doing, why is it hard for them to get there? And you have a couple of granular stories, 1 or 2 granular stories about how hard it is to do what needs to be done right now, they'll follow you anywhere. If you listened and you say that you feel their pain, you can understand why it's hard.
That's brilliant.
And so, it took me years to learn that I had to ask, I need to talk to somebody in the rank and file. So I try to do that ahead of time. There was one company where they said, you're a surprise, so you can't talk to anybody. Literally, they would not let me talk to anybody. So I show up at the event, and everybody's wearing their name tags and walking around. I go in the restaurant, they're all eating. So I'm like, hi, I'm Bonnie, I'm whatever, and I'm here. I can't tell you why I'm here, but can I have dinner with you? They probably thought I was a corporate spy, But so I managed to pick a few brains beforehand too. Yeah.
And sometimes are people a bit frosty and they're like, no, they don't want to share information, or normally can you get the information you need, or you get a feel?
You're going to laugh if I say I'm an introvert. But I've gone to so many conferences, and I will just walk in and start talking to people, and I don't know,
That's
most people are friendly.
Yeah, and maybe because you're doing it for them, you feel like you're not an introvert. You need to do it because it's part of the service.
Well, technically, the definition of introvert that I work with is that you need time alone to refresh yourself. That extroverts regenerate themselves with their friends, and introverts need some time alone to get their energy back. I live in a cabin in the woods on 5 acres. So I disappear and I'm alone. But I'm not shy. And I think, and again, it's practice. I've been to so many conferences. I'll just walk up and start, you got the name tag on from the conference. I'm like, hi, you're at this conference. I'm at this conference too. What's going on? Where are you from?
Do you have questions that work well that people can write down if they're doing this for the first time? How do you kind of start teasing that information out of them?
Well, you want to think about what your topic is and find out how that topic lands in their life. So if you're there to talk about teamwork, why do they not have, what are the problems they have with teamwork? What are the problems teams are having in your organization?
Right.
One I remember was a company that was doing distribution, let's say distribution for appliances. And with the internet now, everybody can see the wholesale prices. Right. And so a lot of people can shortcut the reseller. And so you have to, I think it was like, let's say commercial appliances. You have to be able to explain your value that you're adding beyond the wholesaler. You didn't used to have to do that because they didn't used to be able to get to the wholesaler. So I'm at a convention of people that their core problem is, how do I really sell my value when people don't have to pay for me? And I had a lot of fun with that. I said, I'm a short, one-legged black woman. I've been trying to sell my value my whole life. But when you get their problem and how it lands, what is a situation where you had a customer go around you, get your wholesale prices and say, why should I pay extra for you? They're like, wow, you really get my problem.
Right. So that's all about connecting with the audience, so finding out information to help you connect.
Doing your research, doing your homework, understanding their problems. You said, what are the right questions? It's, if you're doing teamwork, why is teamwork not working? If you're doing marketing, why is marketing not working? If you're, what are you speaking on? If you're doing leadership, what is the leadership challenge right now? It's turbulence, disruption, fear, so much fear. How do you lead in high, rapid change and fear? So when you really understand their problem and you're speaking into that, and with John Maxwell, you get so much material to speak into problems. So it's just saying, don't show up and prepare a really great speech that you don't know what the problem is.
Right. How do you know if you've connected, if you've done the work right, if you found the right information and you're talking to an audience? How do you know if you've connected with them?
That's a great question. How do you know if you've really found the right problem? Wow, you know what the answer that just came to me is when you care.
Right.
If you're listening to all their problems, by the time you've heard it in a way that you care, then you've heard it.
Right.
That's the answer that came to me.
So you told me a story about, I think it was a homeless shelter.
So one of the things I said to Roddy is, I'm fortunate that you look at my video and you go, wow, you know, she has Olympics, she worked in the White House, she's written books, she's done all this. It's not a great accomplishment if I impress you with my resume. I have accomplished very little if I impress you with my resume. If I can connect with you and make you feel like I'm like you, then I can. And if I can make you feel like I'm like you and help you see the hero in yourself, then I've accomplished something. If all I do is show you my resume, I've accomplished nothing. So if I just show my resume, I call it like the Martian effect. You can just go, she's a Martian. You know, she's just not like us. She's just this person who's done all those crazy things in the video. And so making sure that I'm connecting and not just showing off. So one of the biggest challenges for doing that, I was speaking at a homeless shelter. And it's like, if I can make them feel, if I can connect, then I've really done something with that audience. So that's a good indicator of like, are you really connecting?
Right.
And at the end of this speech I gave in the homeless shelter, this big burly guy who didn't smell that great came up and gave me a big hug and he said, "You're just like me."
Oh.
That's the best compliment. If I can help a person in a homeless shelter to look at me and feel like he's like me, that's a good day. Then I've really inspired him to see his own potential and what he can do. And to do that, it's interesting. So I don't just have one set talk or 3 set talks. I feel like I have a pantry full of ingredients. And I listen to what the problem is, and it's like cooking a meal. And I say, okay, I'm gonna use these ingredients, and if I put it together this way, I can lay out a wonderful meal for these people. And so sometimes, like in a homeless shelter, I'm gonna talk about the fact that I was sexually abused as a child for years. And I'm gonna talk about how hard that was to deal with and how I went through years where I could have been an alcoholic, I could have run away, and what that was like. If I'm talking to Deutsche Bank in New York City, that's not gonna be a big part of the conversation, right? So I'm really gonna change what I'm doing for different people. And with Deutsche Bank, it's probably gonna be a more cerebral conversation. And with the homeless shelter, I call it my like slitting a vein speech. It's like, I'm gonna just open a vein and we're just gonna talk, So I spoke recently for a convention of educators who work with the most difficult children, children that are abused and children that are really challenged. And so that was more, of the conversation. Now I can't slit open a vein 3 times a week. It's really emotionally draining to do that. But I do value the opportunity to do that from time to time, is to use some of the hardest things that have ever happened to me to help others grow.
Right.
But then, but I enjoy the intellectual things. I mean, I enjoy reading Harvard Business Review, and I enjoy that. So I enjoy the diversity of getting to have different kinds of audiences. But it's very, very different. It's a very cerebral conversation versus a very emotional. And sometimes you're in between. You have to be able to create that balance, that right mixture between fact or new ideas versus emotion.
So you find out about the audience, find out where their pain is, find out what's not working, which hopefully you can help with, and then you go to your pantry. I love that analogy. You go to the pantry to see what ingredients you can put together for the meal. How well stocked was the pantry at the beginning when you started out? Did you have materials?
You add to it. You find, there was one time I was speaking to the OSHA conference for the state of Maine, and I told a story about my daughter that I've never told before or since. When she was 3 years old, she got one of those fuzzy things off a pussy willow, and she shoved it up her nose. So far up, at first I didn't believe it was in there, and then I got a flashlight, and I'm like, yep, it's in there. And we had to take her to the emergency room, and they had to get it out. But she said, Mom, you told me never to stick anything in my ear. And so that was such a great story for OSHA, because that's a central problem when you're working in corporations trying to keep people safe. No amount of rules you can make. You can't make a rule for everything that can happen, and so you have to get people interested in safety. Anyway, so that was a story that made sense for that event. And so as you're meeting more people, you're adding more stories, and some of them you reuse. How many of you saw me speak yesterday morning? A few of you saw me speak yesterday morning. That was a speech I've never given anywhere else. I had so much fun making that meal for you guys. That was the mentor group. And so I will probably end up using some of that again, or parts of it again, and it's like, so I guess part of what I'm saying is you create in response to people.
Right. And you're keeping, though, the best ingredients, or the tastiest ingredients.
So you can end up reusing them and doing things, and so you get a bigger pantry based on the things you do. And stories change over time. So I sometimes tell the story about having to toughen up the nerves on my stump in order to wear an artificial leg. And I had to push on a scale. And I started telling that story just to talk about pushing through obstacles and being tough. And it was about me pushing on the scale. But over time, I started to talk more and more about the nurse who sat beside me while I was pushing on that scale, and how much she loved me to go through tough times with me, and more focused on that nurse as how can we be that for other people. And then it made another evolution years later into, you know what, you could be asking people to be that nurse in your life. You could be asking for people to push you. And so it's for me, stories are a lived experience.
Right.
And what's interesting about that too is it became less and less about me. The story became more and more about how do I serve you.
Right. How long did that thinking take? Was you conscious of a time when you thought, it's not about all about me?
So I homeschooled my oldest daughter for 1st through 5th grade. I say my oldest daughter. My other 2 daughters are bonus with purchase. So Darcy, I homeschooled from 1st through 5th grade, and she came with me speaking. When she would go to visit her dad, but when she was with me, she'd be on planes. Really, homeschooling was a misnomer. Right. It's really hotel schooling. But she's the human being that heard me speak more than anyone else. And it was fascinating. She would say every once in a while, wow, you've really made a breakthrough in your speaking. Like, it's changed.
Right.
And so she was like my speaking coach. So it's like I would be speaking, and all of a sudden it would just shift.
Right.
And so it's not necessarily a linear process.
Okay. So we're going to need to wrap up. I could talk about this for ages, but do you have one kind of thought, or I have one question to ask you? But it was your kind of signature story is a great story. I love it. And you talked about how that kind of came about. But you'll hear at the keynote.
You'll hear. I'll open with it on the keynote on Wednesday.
Yeah, but how did that kind of come together? Because people are sort of thinking, I'm going to put together a story. One of the first coaches I worked with, and I've worked with several different speaking coaches, was going through stuff with me and said she'd heard me speak, and I had told this story kind of just like in passing, and she's like, no, that's your signature story. And she helped me to sort of brand it and to come up with phrases that were, this is the key phrase that story is about, and to iron out the phrase. And I'll tell you the phrase, it's a giveaway, but it's okay, is people fall down, winners get up, but the gold medal winner gets up the fastest. And
it took me a while. That's so funny. I've ruined the story now. That's okay. We'll still enjoy it. But that sounds so simple, but it took a while to net that out and to clarify it and to work through it. And having somebody outside myself to help me work through it was really helpful.
Because I think a lot of people in the audience will look at John's stories, they look at your stories, and they think, I just don't have stories like that. But it was interesting that you've worked at yours.
Somebody else pointed to it and went, that's your signature story.
Right.
Oh, okay. I might not have seen it myself. So you can definitely get help. And you can have a peer, that if you're working together might help you clarify something like that, or it might evolve over time.
Right.
But that's been one of my greatest hits.
Did you enjoy that? I told you she was good, didn't I? So much rich information there, so much goodness. You're going to want to listen to that over and over and over again so that you can get all of the gems out of there, all of the golden nuggets. So much great stuff. So that was recorded in front of about 3,000 Maxwell Leadership Certified Team members at an international Maxwell conference. Now, I've talked about becoming a Maxwell Leadership Certified Team member before. If you want to find out what that means, and as I said, if you want to become a speaker, then it's a no-brainer, really. It really is. But it's so much more than just speaking. The Maxwell Leadership Certified Team is vast with so many resources. I can't do it justice here. The best thing you can do is jump on a call with a program advisor and let them explain it to you. There's nearly 60,000 Maxwell Leadership Certified Team coaches around the world in about 168 countries. So it's huge, and it's growing very, very quickly. To book an appointment, just go to maxwellleadership.com/speak and you can find out more. All right, let's just pick up on a few of the gems then that she dropped. She talked about being a self-made celebrity. She allows people to celebrate her. She creates that. She's created that and continues to work hard to create that. She's a self-made celebrity. She ended up eventually partnering with the Washington Speakers Bureau. She tried to get them to represent her for a long time, but when she really needed them, they didn't need her. It was only really when she was getting booked more and more and clients were asking them for her that then they were like, okay, yeah, we'll represent you. So when she needed them, they didn't need her. And by the time they needed her, she didn't really need them. But then it became a partnership where they worked both sides hard at it to make it the successful partnership that it is today. And as part of her work, part of her responsibility, she works very, very hard to bring real value to the clients. And one of the ways that she does that, she said, is she makes them the hero. She looks for a way to find wonder in their work. Isn't that great? To find a way to find wonder in what it is that they do so that they can feel like the hero. The way that she does that is by interviewing people ahead of time, not just the leadership team, but people on the ground as well, the regular staffers, the worker bees, if you like, so that they're representative of the people that are going to be in the audience, so that she doesn't just speak and sound like management. She wants them saying, you're just like me. You're just like me. Isn't that good? It's so good. So simple when you think about it. Avoid sounding like management if it's not just management in the room. So she says, do your research. Make sure you do your research. Do your homework. Make sure you understand their problems so that you can really connect with them. The opposite of this really is where you just kind of come in pretending you don't make any mistakes. Everything you do is perfect and effortless and easy. And then she says, that's the Martian effect. You create the Martian effect where they're looking at you like, you're just not from around here. You're not like me. I can see those things would work for you because you're special. But they wouldn't work for me because I've got real problems. So it's not about showing off and getting them to look up at her. She says it's about connecting with them just where they are. You're just like me, being the perfect compliment after you've spoken. So simple, isn't it? But so good. So good. So don't forget to download the companion guide. You can go to maxwellleadership.com/The Speaker's Edge, as I said. We'll be back next week. See you soon in the next episode. And don't forget, communication skills are learnable skills. You can learn to develop your skills. Then you can get better and better at your speaking. You can learn to master your message so that you can inspire your audience every single time you speak. Look forward to seeing you soon. Take care. Lots of love. Bye-bye. God bless.